Bernie Madoff didn't become a monster overnight. His story began quietly with charm, confidence, and a talent for making people feel safe. Long before the lies, he walked Wall Street like a man who belonged there, a man whose calm smile could silence doubt. People trusted him instantly, and that trust became the first brick in the empire he would eventually destroy. In the early years, Bernie wasn't running a fraud. He was ambitious, hungry for status, desperate to rise above the world he came from. He started his small firm with real trades, real clients, and real effort. But beneath his success lived a deep insecurity, an ache to be admired, to be seen as the man who always won, no matter the odds. Wall Street is a place where image can be more powerful than truth, and Bernie understood that better than anyone. He learned that people didn't just invest money, they invested faith. And Bernie decided early on that he would never allow that faith to break, even if it meant bending rules, even if it meant crossing lines he once swore he'd never touch. The turning point wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a grand decision. It was a quiet moment, a loss he didn't want to admit, a promise he didn't want to break, he told himself. It was temporary, just a small lie to protect his clients, to protect his image, but small lies grow. And once he took that first step, the next was easier, and the next easier still. What began as a minor cover-up slowly became a pattern. Bernie saw that investors loved the steady returns he reported. They loved the idea of a safe harbor in a volatile world. They praised him, defended him, called him a genius. And with every compliment, every grateful handshake, Bernie felt more trapped. He couldn't disappoint them. He couldn't reveal the truth. So the lie expanded at first. He still believed he could fix it. He thought he could earn enough real returns to fill the gap later. But those real opportunities never came, and with every new investor, every new dollar, he sank deeper. His scheme didn't grow from greed alone. It grew from fear. Fear of failure. Fear of shame. Fear of being ordinary. Bernie mastered the art of appearing calm. He gave interviews with a soft voice and a reassuring smile. He spoke like a man who understood markets better than anyone alive. His clients believed he had a secret, some brilliant strategy that protected them from chaos. Bernie did nothing to correct them. Their belief became his shield. But behind the calm exterior, Bernie lived in two worlds. In one world, he was a respected leader, a former NASDAQ chairman, a man whose name carried weight. In the other world, hidden behind locked doors and outdated computers, he was the architect of a growing illusion. Every day he signed fake statements. Every day he built a fantasy he knew could collapse. As the scheme grew, Bernie discovered something dangerous. People wanted to believe him. Wealthy families bragged about being in his fund. Banks begged him to take their money. Charities relied on his steady returns. Each new client didn't just bring money. They brought pressure to keep the illusion alive no matter the cost. By now, the fraud wasn't a loophole or a mistake. It was a machine, one that needed endless fuel. Bernie knew he was far beyond turning back. If he confessed, everything would crumble. His firm, his reputation, his family, his legacy, gone. So he kept going, convincing himself he was protecting the people who trusted him, even as he sank them deeper into danger. Inside, Bernie felt the weight of the lie pressing against him. He knew the numbers didn't make sense. He knew the returns were impossible. He knew one day someone would ask the right question, but year after year, no one did. Regulators glanced at his operation and saw nothing wrong. Investors saw constant profits and asked no further questions. And so the scheme swelled. What started as a small secret became a multi-billion-dollar illusion. Bernie wasn't running a business anymore. He was running a performance. Every monthly statement, every perfect return, every calm smile was part of the act. He became addicted to the admiration he received, even as it suffocated him. Deep down, Bernie understood he was building something doomed to collapse. A lie can expand, but it cannot survive forever. Markets shift, people panic, questions arise. He knew the fuse had been lit long ago and the explosion was inevitable, but he chose to look away, choosing comfort over truth, illusion over honesty, ego over integrity. As the years passed, Bernie's world grew more fragile. He could feel the walls tightening, the doubts rising, the pressure climbing, but he couldn't stop. He had become a prisoner of his own success. Every day he kept the lie alive with a steady hand and a practiced voice, telling himself he was protecting his investors, when in reality he was leading them toward disaster. Bernie standing at the edge of a storm he knows is coming. The lie has grown too big, the illusion too widespread, the danger too close, and yet he continues because he believes stopping would destroy everything. But the truth is simple. The destruction has already begun. Bernie Madoff's empire looked flawless from the outside. Celebrities, billionaires, and charities lined up to invest with him. He was the man who never failed, never stumbled, never reported a single losing month. To his investors, he seemed almost magical, but behind the polished smile and calm voice, Bernie knew the truth. He wasn't a genius. He was trapped in a lie that had grown too big to escape. The early losses he hid had added up, and every year the pressure increased instead of stopping. Bernie made a choice that would define his life. He doubled down rather than admit failure. He quietly began taking money from new clients and using it to pay old ones. The machine kept running, but only because he kept feeding it. This wasn't innovation. It wasn't strategy. It was a Ponzi scheme, the oldest trick in the book. And Bernie Madoff, one of the most respected men on Wall Street, was now its master architect. Every day he walked into his office pretending everything was perfect. His staff respected him. His clients adored him. Even regulators believed his story, and that only made the guilt press harder against his chest. Bernie built two worlds inside his firm. One was the public side. Bright offices, expensive suits, and clients drinking champagne. The other was a hidden floor packed with outdated computers, fake statements, and a team paid to print lies. His closest employees sensed something was wrong. They saw impossible returns and secret instructions, but Bernie kept them loyal with money, fear, and the illusion that they were part of something too big to question. Meanwhile, clients kept pouring in. Word of mouth spread like wildfire. Madoff never loses, they said. He's the safest investment in America. People trusted him with their retirement, college funds, and life savings. And the more they trusted him, the more terrified he became. The truth was simple. If just a fraction of his clients requested their money at once, the entire empire would collapse in a single day. Bernie told himself he would fix everything soon. He always said just one more year, one more cycle, one more chance. But that year never arrived. His lies only grew faster than his excuses. He blamed the markets for his troubles. He blamed the regulators. He blamed the pressure of expectations. But deep down, Bernie knew exactly who was responsible: himself and his craving to be admired. Every night, he went home to the same fear. He knew his scheme was collapsing slowly, inch by inch, but he couldn't stop. The thought of confessing, you felt worse than the crime itself. The investors who loved him most became the ones he feared most. Families who trusted him completely would eventually learn he had wiped out their entire future. But Bernie forced himself not to think about it. He convinced himself he was protecting them. He convinced himself he'd repay everyone someday. These comforting lies kept him going, even as his fraud grew into the largest Ponzi scheme in history. By the early 2000s, some financial analysts were suspicious. They questioned Bernie's perfect returns and his strange secrecy, but he dismissed them as jealous rivals, and astonishingly, regulators agreed with him. He used his reputation as a shield. His past success blinded everyone to the truth. After all, Bernie was a former NASDAQ chairman. Why would a man of his status? That question protected him for years. No one imagined such a powerful figure would risk everything, and yet he had already risked everything. Long ago, for the sake of pride, Bernie also built walls of complexity around himself. He created layers of accounts, shell processes, and misleading paperwork. The more confusing it looked, the safer he felt. But inside, he was falling apart. He avoided questions, dodged audits, and crafted new lies when old ones began to crumble. His entire life became a performance he couldn't escape by this time. Bernie's fraud wasn't a scheme, it was a monster. And like all monsters, it demanded constant feeding. If he ever stopped, even for a moment, everything would come crashing down. The fear of exposure haunted him each morning. He expected regulators to burst through his doors. Each evening, he waited for a client to ask for money he didn't have. But somehow, scandal never came. His survival felt unreal. He began to believe he was untouchable, protected by luck, and a system blinded by greed. Investors loved the fantasy he sold, and he loved the power it brought. Yet, behind the arrogance, Bernie lived in constant dread. He knew he was sitting on a ticking time bomb. He didn't know when it would explode, only that it would. Eventually, still, he couldn't step away. Too many people admired him. Too many clients depended on him. Too many lies were stacked on top of each other. Bernie felt there was no escape, and so he kept going deeper and deeper into the darkness. With every fake statement and every new investor, he tightened the noose around his own neck. His secret world was slowly preparing for its final collapse. Bernie didn't know it yet, but the end was already closer than he believed. All it needed was one shock, one unexpected event to expose everything, and that event was coming. A financial storm was gathering on the horizon, a storm powerful enough to destroy even the biggest lies. Bernie couldn't stop it. This time there would be no delay, no excuse, and no escape. His empire, built on trust and deception, was about to face reality for now, though he kept pretending he was still in control, pretending the world still saw him as a legend, pretending he wasn't terrified of what tomorrow might reveal. But deep inside, he knew the truth. His empire wasn't built on genius. It was built on fear, and soon the world would discover exactly how it all began to crumble. By 2008, the financial world was cracking under pressure, markets fell, banks collapsed, and investors everywhere panicked. For Bernie Madoff, this was the moment he feared more than anything. His empire was built on confidence, disappearing fast. Clients who once praised him now needed cash to survive. They began requesting withdrawals, desperate to save what they could. But Bernie didn't have their money. He had spent years paying old investors with new deposits. The pot was dry. Bernie watched the numbers with growing dread. For the first time, the outflow was bigger than the inflow. His machine was failing. His carefully crafted illusion was slipping through his fingers. Each morning, he sat in his office, staring at the phone, waiting for more withdrawal requests. Every ring felt like a nail being hammered into the coffin of his empire. He knew he couldn't keep up. His staff sensed the tension. The secret floor was now a storm of panic. They printed fake statements with trembling hands, knowing the truth was closing in. Even the machines that once hummed with confidence now sounded like alarms. Bernie tried one last tactic. He begged investors to stay calm. He told them the market would recover soon. He promised their money was safe. The same lie he had repeated for decades. But this time, no one believed that withdrawals kept coming. Millions, then billions. Each request cut deeper into a void Bernie couldn't fill. The iceberg beneath the surface had finally ripped through the hull. For years, Bernie's arrogance had convinced him he could fix everything. He thought one day he would make enough to repay everyone. But now the collapse was too fast, too loud, and too big to hide. He knew the end was here. He knew there were no more tricks left. The storm had arrived, and it was impossible to survive at home. Bernie walked in silence. His family felt the tension, but didn't know why. His wife, Ruth, sensed something was wrong. His sons noticed the fear in his eyes, but Bernie kept the truth inside. One night, he gathered his family and finally confessed. He told them everything: the fraud, the lies, the billions lost. His sons were shocked, devastated, betrayed. They handed him over to the authorities the very next day. Bernie didn't resist. He walked into his office, sat at his desk, and waited. When the FBI arrived, he simply said, "It's all one big lie." The mask he had worn for 40 years finally dropped. The news spread instantly. Headlines exploded around the world. Madoff arrested. Largest Ponzi scheme in history. Investors cried, screamed, and collapsed as they realized their life savings had vanished. Retirees were left with nothing. Families who trusted Bernie for decades felt destroyed. Some couldn't recover emotionally or financially. His fraud broke more than bank accounts. It broke lives. The courtroom was filled with anger and sorrow. Victims described losing everything: homes, businesses, futures. Some said they trusted Bernie more than their own families. That trust had cost them everything. Bernie stood silently as they spoke. For the first time, he couldn't hide behind charm or numbers. He was exposed, a man who valued reputation more than people. Judges and prosecutors struggled to comprehend the scale of his fraud: $65 billion, thousands of victims, decades of deception. It wasn't just a crime, it was a catastrophe. When the judge announced his sentence, 150 years in prison, the courtroom felt a heavy closure. Bernie didn't argue, didn't fight. He simply nodded, as if accepting the fate he had created piece by piece. But even prison didn't stop the ripple effects. Families continued to suffer for years. Some victims never recovered. Others rebuilt their lives slowly, but the scars remained. Bernie's own family was destroyed. His wife became isolated. His sons faced shame and suspicion, even though they weren't involved. One of them took his own life years later, unable to carry the emotional weight. The empire Bernie built wasn't just financial, it was personal. His fraud didn't stay inside bank accounts. It seeped into every relationship he had, poisoning everything he touched. Behind bars, Bernie lived in the shadows, no longer admired, no longer respected. His fellow inmates saw him as just another criminal. The grandeur of his past meant nothing now. He spent his days reflecting on the empire he once controlled. The power, the praise, the illusion of perfection, all of it had vanished, leaving only regret and emptiness. He admitted in interviews that the scheme began small, just an attempt to hide early losses. But pride turned those small lies into a roaring monster he could no longer contain. Bernie once said he felt relieved after being caught. The burden had finally lifted. The decades of pretending were over, but that relief came at the cost of countless lives shattered by his greed. He knew the world would remember him, not as a financial genius, but as the architect of the biggest fraud in history. His name would forever symbolize deception. Investors today still ask how he fooled so many for so long. But the answer is simple. People believed what they wanted to believe, and Bernie knew exactly how to play that desire. Even after the collapse, some people couldn't accept he had lied to them. That was the power of his illusion. It blinded even the most intelligent minds. Bernie's rise and fall became a lesson carved into Wall Street's memory. When someone promises perfection, it's usually the biggest warning sign of all. And